My next guest has been banned from Twitter, while videos of his interviews are taken down from YouTube every day. Is he a member of ISIS or maybe the Taliban? Nope. Terrorists can still use their social media accounts. It's Dr. Robert Malone, an acclaimed scientist whose work in the late 1980s helped create the technology behind mRNA vaccines. But he's dared to question the efficacy and side effects of the COVID vaccine rollout. And on Joe Rogan's Spotify podcast, Malone claimed much of the COVID and lockdown hysteria is a result of a phenomenon called mass formation psychosis, a term, very ironically, now being censored by big tech.
You have a society that has become decoupled from each other and has free-floating anxiety in a sense that things don't make sense. We can't understand it. And then their attention gets focused by a leader or a series of events on one small point, just like hypnosis. They literally become hypnotized and can be led anywhere. Anybody who questions that narrative is to be immediately attacked. They are the other. This is central to mass formation psychosis. And this is what has happened.
Robert, it is so great to have you here tonight. I actually Googled mass formation psychosis over the weekend. And you know, the first response I found was a Reuters article with the headline, "Fact check. No evidence of pandemic mass formation psychosis, say experts," speaking to Reuters. Now, this is just part of big tech continuing to censor you, right? Following your various Twitter and YouTube and LinkedIn bans.
So here's what's fascinating is that it's not my theory. The AP, Thomson Reuters, The Independent, and multiple other outlets. I just got a call today from MedPage Today, who wants to write another little ankle biter article, are all saying that this is not academic. They're attacking me for this theory, which they ascribe to me. They use citations from junior academics to do so. And it's not my theory. It's the theory of Professor Matthias Desmet of the University of Ghent. He's an absolutely solid academic with over 170 publications. He's come out with a book recently called The Psychology of Totalitarianism, in which he describes his mass formation theories. And they are built on a large library of over 200 years of academic research into this topic of the behavior of crowds, including by some of the people that are considered foundational in 20th century psychology, such as Hannah Arendt, a survivor of the Holocaust, in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism. So this comes at us, and there are all these assertions being made by the fact checkers, as usual, that aren't actually grounded in fact, as usual. They didn't do their homework, as usual. And so Matthias and I have spent a good part of today writing a little Substack article that you can find at rwmalonemdsubstack.com titled Mass Formation Deployed on You After Over 200 Years of Study. That's the situation we're in. And what's fascinating is how all of these entities have been triggered by this little tiny component of that Joe Rogan podcast, which, by the way, I'm told was the #1 podcast in the world, and has well over 50 million views. And in what became trending out of that, was fascinating to me, is mass formation. And by the way, Matthias reprimanded me on a podcast that I did with him and Peter McCullough. He said, don't use the term psychosis because it's not in the Diagnostics and Statistical Manual for diagnosing psychiatric disease. So now let's all get on the bandwagon with Matthias, since it's his theory, and just call it mass formation, or we can call it mass formation hypnosis, but we're not supposed to say psychosis because the gods of psychiatry haven't blessed that yet.
I like the term, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I've just been wondering, Doctor, if you've been looking at what's happened in Australia with Novak Djokovic over the past few days and his treatment, and wondering if that could be an example of mass formation psychosis.
It is, and there are many, many examples, and many historic examples. A case can be made that the story of Jesus Christ reflects this, that the Twin Towers coming down, the events around the communist scare in the United States. It goes on and on. Of course, the Russian Revolution and Stalin and his purges, and okay, we're not supposed to say this, Hitler, and the things that happened during World War II to the Germans and the German mind. This is a fundamental aspect of human behavior. And Matthias documents in his new book how this has gotten worse and worse and worse under the influence of mass media. He directly attributes, if you allow me to just read a quote from Matthias regarding this. If under these conditions a narrative is distributed through the mass media, which indicates an object of anxiety and provides a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, then all the free-floating anxiety might be associated to this object, and a huge willingness might be observed to participate in this strategy to deal with the object of the anxiety. Now, this is, forgive me, this is a serious academic using academic talk, but basically he lays the blame for this right at the front door of the global mass media. And what's fascinating for me is that one of the first attack that came at me was from this publication called Forbes, which used to be a mainstay of capitalism in the United States, but is now pretty much lock, stock, and barrel owned by the Chinese. So what we've got is a media narrative that's being reinforced that is entirely consistent with the one that the Communist Party in China wants to put out for some reason, that mass formation is crazy talk.
Of course. And when it comes to you, I think the reason why they've struggled so much is because how on earth can you call the bloke who essentially was responsible, at least in part, for developing the mRNA technology that has ended up giving us these vaccines, how on earth can you call him an anti-vaxxer? But because you have questioned the vaccine rollout, because you have questioned Pfizer, because you have questioned the side effects, you are now branded an anti-vaxxer, even though you did actually have the first two jabs yourself.
There's an answer to that. What you do is you change the meaning of the word anti-vaxxer in Webster's dictionary to include anybody who has reservations about mandates. That's how you do it. You change. I mean, George Orwell must be spinning in his grave, or he feels totally validated by the Trusted News Initiative and your good friends over at the BBC, who just seem to be bent on proving his theories true.
I know. It's so disturbing. Look, I want to play you a clip of the Labour leader here. He's called Keir Starmer. I actually call him the leader of no opposition, because he seems to think that the solution to Omicron is vaccinating young children. Can you have a look at this, Robert? And I'll get you to react off the back.
Only about half of those over 12 who are eligible to be vaccinated have been vaccinated. We said to the government, use the Christmas period to vaccinate those children. We need much better ventilation. We've been saying this for about a year to stop the virus spreading in schools.
So the key point there, Dr. Malone, is that he suggests that the way to stop transmission of Omicron is by vaccinating young children. Now, we've learned that that won't help, right?
Okay, so let's be blunt. I'm going to speak rather bluntly. Your Labour leader is suggesting that between 1 in 1,000 and 1 in 3,000 of your children, and according to the Hong Kong study, something like 1 in 2,700 of your male children will go to the hospital with heart damage for a disease for which there is no significant risk of death in those same children.
And that's why you say we should not be vaccinating children at all.
That and the theories of Gert von den Bosch, which are being played out in real time and validated, that being that by universal vaccination, we're driving the development of vaccine escape mutants, essentially super viruses that will blow through the vaccines. And now we have data from all over the world increasingly coming in that the vaccinated are at highest risk of Omicron infection. I mean, at some point, there has got to be an accounting. These people have got to be held to account for what they have done to us. And as is being documented in the British press, thank you very much, we have had British government and other governments now coming clean with the fact that they have intentionally used fear to drive behavior in their populations. This is grossly unethical, and people have to be held accountable for it. Full stop. I'm sorry, I'm a little angry about this.
No.
I try to stay balanced, but
I understand
this is
why.
just not right.
I understand why, and I've spent the past 22 months calling out that fear as well. Do you, Dr. Malone, though, agree with Professor Sunetra Gupta, who is one of the co-authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, also shamefully silenced by the mainstream media and big tech, who was on the show recently and said she still does believe the extremely clinically vulnerable should be vaccinated?
So that is an issue that is a little bit on the edge, and it depends on which database and the multiplicative factors that you apply to that database you're going to look at. The problem is the data are a mess. They're a hot mess right now, and it's hard to do good risk-benefit evaluation, but there are many credible analyses that suggest that even for those high-risk individuals, the number of lives saved by vaccination is exceeded by the number of lives that will be compromised by the vaccine. So I've supported the Great Barrington Declaration in editorials. I have also been attacked for that by our good friends in the United States government. But it's a gross tragedy that we now know we can lay at the feet of Drs. Tony Fauci and his colleagues, Francis Collins and Cliff Lane in the United States, this intentional attack on the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. That's another obscenity. But in terms of the specific question, this is a topic in flux right now, and it presents great difficulty for me, because if we're going to maintain my integrity, I have to acknowledge that as the data are coming out more and more, it is getting more and more dicey to vote in favor of any population being administered these genetic vaccines.
Fascinating stuff. Well, look, please keep in touch with us, Dr. Malone, because you're obviously a very important voice. Obviously, we get both sides of the argument here on GB News. So in response to Dr. Malone's account being suspended, a Twitter spokesperson told us Dr. Robert Malone's account was permanently suspended for repeated violations of our COVID-19 misinformation policy. We will permanently suspend accounts for repeated violations of this policy. On Dr. Malone's comments about mass formation psychosis around COVID, Stephen Riker, professor of social psychology at the University of St Andrews and crucially a SAGE member, said telling people who disagree with you that they are deluded and in a state of psychosis is essentially a device to silence them and a form of disrespect. It alienates and hence undermines an attempt at dialogue. It isn't an explanation of the problem, it is part of the problem. And Pfizer have responded to Dr. Malone's comments, the company told us tonight, with hundreds of millions of doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine administered globally. The benefit-risk profile of our vaccine remains positive.